Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight marks the first chapter in what is likely to be a long line of Persona 5 related spin-off games. A simple and effective strategy that has helped Atlus's Persona team bridge the increasingly long gaps between core installments of the series. As such, Dancing in Starlight faces two distinct challenges. The first is simply to deliver more of what its role-playing progenitor provided, and thus must tackle any qualitative comparisons to its inspiration that will arise. The second is a group of difficulties associated with being the first game to extend the lifespan of a relatively new and unstoried portion of Persona lore. That said, the Persona team are experienced doing this, and while Persona is an inherently nostalgic series, P5D, as it's known colloquially, without much history, still manages to offer a fairly complete and pleasantly familiar Persona package. Of these two issues, the most sage place to begin is with the latter, which rears its head initially in an area most players will notice immediately. At first blush, it's worth noting that, due to the fairly recent release of Persona 5, P5D isn't necessarily positioned as a long-awaited reunion. Nonetheless, whether or not the player is warmed by the pleasant sensation of rekindling old friendships, I do believe most Persona fans, myself included, will hold some desire to see this cast in full flight once more, in a new story with its own highs and lows. The benefit of a tangible campaign mode, therefore, is clear. Whether it allows the player to take part in one last adventure and rub shoulders with the crew again, or whether it tells a story of its own inherent interest that can serve as a way to reintroduce less nostalgic players to some of the things they had forgotten they were missing. As a result, the noticeable absence of a concrete story mode may strike many as a gross oversight, and players, having completed a brief tutorial, must go searching for what is on offer instead. The merits of the structure of Persona 5 Dancing, therefore, are not immediately apparent. What the game chooses to offer instead are brief but enjoyable social link events with the main cast that can be viewed and revisited to your heart's content. While these may seem like a very insubstantial offering in comparison, by requiring certain conditions to be met in the dancing portion of the game, there is a clear method behind this choice. Luckily, these conditions are quite simple and include wearing different costumes or accessories, clearing a certain number of tracks, and utilizing the many creative gameplay modifiers. By encouraging or requiring the player to dip in and out between gameplay and social events, Persona 5 Dancing sets quite a flexible and enjoyable tempo to its gameplay that looks something like this. In the beginning, play the first few tracks that pique your interest, then watch an event or two, unlocking new gameplay items and modifiers. Try some new tracks with a mind to meeting the conditions to unlock more social events, then watch a different character's event and unlock more new costumes or accessories. Then return to maybe perfect a few different tracks with the things unlocked by watching that event. In doing this, not only does the game manage to integrate into its gameplay many of the gameplay modifiers that seemed unimportant and ancillary in Persona 4 Dancing, but after a while, and with a little patience, it will become clear how the game is attempting to fold its two different parts into one another, and when players leave behind the expectation for a full-on story mode, they will see it instead as a more organic and traditional Persona-style take on a spin-off, a buffet to sample at one's pleasure, rather than a sit-down, set-course meal. Now that the structure that Persona 5 Dancing uses to tell its story content is clear, it's worth examining the quality of the social events themselves. Most of these social events entail some sort of discussion or exchange between the protagonist and another member or two of the Phantom Thieves about their trials and tribulations as they prepare themselves to dance the night away in the predictably strange scenario they find themselves in. And through these, an overarching story is slowly elucidated. It's certainly worth stating up front that anyone who comes to these events expecting something as strong as some of the series' more accomplished social links will most certainly be disappointed. There are some moments concerning the past and future of the Phantom Thieves that are rewarding for anyone who craves more insight into the lives of the gang from Shujin Academy, but for the most part, these events are short, sweet, and comedic. As a result, it's best to view them through the lens of the structure I've just detailed, as a brief injection of humour that forms part of a larger whole. Next, it's important to consider the presentation of the events themselves. On an unequivocally positive note, the entire voiced cast of Persona 5 reprise their roles, so players can expect the highest level of quality from these events when it comes to delivery, timing, and tone. Another point worth mentioning is one that is not as clearly beneficial. Persona 5 Dancing chooses to present these social events with fully three-dimensional character models, rather than incorporating some form of hand-drawn animation. On one hand, this choice eliminates a significant amount of detail which can be found in more finely crafted animation. One doesn't have to look too far to see how this is positive. Take this simple character design from Persona 5 itself, and notice all the essential detail present for this character. The disheveled tie, the lines on his aging face, and his honest, open expression. That said, what these models can portray effectively is more energetic and spontaneous movement. It's for this reason that I believe this choice is positive for these mostly humorous exchanges, and is very helpful for making exaggerated or slapstick reactions more dynamic. All in all, these story elements can and should be scrutinized in isolation. They're relatively one-dimensional, and there's certainly a significant quantitative demerit to be placed on their record when compared to a broader story or campaign mode. Nevertheless, it's the efficacy of their implementation that makes them a success. In terms of gameplay, Persona 5 Dancing owes much to its predecessor Persona 4 Dancing All Night, with a few noticeable quality of life improvements included. Notes emanate from the center of the screen, rotating in a circular, clockwise motion that align neatly with the respective face buttons on the controller or handheld. Gameplay includes a fairly standard mix of two-hand notes and held notes, but more importantly retains the series' staple record scratches, which ask the player to remove their hands from their comfortable position to quickly flick a thumbstick. What makes this particular feature stand out is how it requires the player to more accurately and effectively predict and prepare for upcoming note combinations, by forcing them to take into consideration the slightly longer time it takes to remove one's hand from the default position on the face buttons and D-pad. At the highest level of difficulty, this mechanic dictates total ambidexterity in order to master most tracks, and can also be an avenue for a little bit of expression and flair when one is playing. The quality of life improvements mentioned over Persona 4 Dancing include very clear demarcation of scratches, as well as so-called double notes, which signify two close notes that need to be pressed in very quick succession. Something which can be particularly helpful when ascertaining the correct timing after a pause or lull in the flow of notes. The next important port of call is to examine the tracks that the players will be dancing along to. There are two approaches to take when considering this track list, a qualitative and quantitative analysis. In terms of quantity, Persona 5 Dancing offers approximately the same number of tracks as its predecessor in the rhythm genre. A number I'm sure the developer was very keen to meet, especially in light of the purported comparative brevity of the campaign offerings. Although this obviously seems positive, after a while it becomes clear how the track total is not as robust as it seems at face value. A significant number of these tracks are taken directly from the role-playing game itself, and while it is enjoyable to play along to some of the most climactic pieces from the RPG, when many of these also appear in the form of remixes, or in one case a live performance, it seems a little limited unless the remix is particularly new or novel. For example, the name Rivers in the Desert and Last Surprise combine to appear, whether live or as remixes, 6 times in the track list. This is a considerable proportion of the list, and should be contrasted to Persona 4 dancing, which could draw from a significantly broader spectrum of Persona 4 related games to compile its tracklist. Still in all, in this department, Persona 5 dancing does offer a few things that are new and welcome, and all worth a quick mention. First, it introduces a few special tracks that adopt more of a music video style than a personal dance routine. These are more energetic and dramatic than the solo dance sequences and act as a nice refresher, even if they don't provide quite as much energy as some other acclaimed rhythm games. And second, in a very welcome move, Persona 5 dancing takes some of the in-game environments from Persona 5 as the location for its dances. It can often be charming to see the familiar cast in locations that carry nostalgic value for players, and, compared to Persona 4 dancing, the extra variety this provides by itself alone is worthwhile. Before we conclude, I think it's important to briefly mention a few noticeably absent features that would be particularly useful for a game such as this. First and foremost is a feature I believe is crucial for a rhythm game of the sort of Persona 5 dancing: the ability to organize tracks by favorite or to create custom playlists. Though perhaps this speaks more to the somewhat disappointing offering of the musical selection for the base game, it is nonetheless a feature I believe that players who come to the game primarily as a Persona fan would particularly appreciate, so they could partition off a subset of the most enjoyable tracks to focus on. The second, and arguably more important feature, would be the ability to practice specific snippets of any song that the player is finding challenging, especially in situations where the troublesome part is towards the end of the song. Not only would this circumvent a lot of unnecessary frustration, but the ability to pick up a piece from anywhere marks a very significant step towards mastery. I concede that there is a delicate balance to be walked here when considering gameplay difficulty, and that being able to do this may erode too much challenge. Luckily, even without this feature, Persona 5 dancing, unlike Persona 4 dancing, doesn't contain as many marathon-length tracks, which, without this ability to practice sections in isolation, can easily turn off even the most dedicated players. Ultimately, the flaws Persona 5 dancing presents as a rhythm game are still quite noticeable, despite the game's many virtues, and there is some debate as to whether the structure it adopts is in fact positive. Though on its face, it seems that in contrast to its musical predecessor, Persona 5 dancing is perhaps a better Persona game than it is a rhythm game. Nonetheless, I still enjoyed my time with Persona 5 dancing. It's an engaging, polished, and competent offering, so long as you can stomach its price.